XRP holders, listen carefully because this is one of those moments where silence from the mainstream is louder than any headline, and the next 7 days could separate the informed from the blindsided because while everyone else is distracted by noise, price chop, and panic tweets, something far more calculated is unfolding around XRP and Ripple that most people are completely missing. And yes, this could be a tough week on the surface, but only if you do not understand the deeper game being played behind closed doors by institutions that move trillions. Because when you see sudden pressure, hesitation, and coordinated fear, you have to ask yourself, why now? Why this timing, and who benefits if retail loses conviction? Because this is exactly how markets are engineered before major structural shifts. And if you are holding XRP right now, you need to hear this before the next candle closes. Because the SEC narrative, the global liquidity squeeze chatter, the IMF language around cross-border settlement reform, and the quiet positioning of names like BlackRock and legacy banking partners are not random coincidences. They are puzzle pieces snapping together while social media screams collapse. And before I go any further, I need you to do one thing that costs nothing but could change how you navigate this entire cycle. Tap the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications right now because this channel is where we connect the dots. Others are too afraid or too uninformed to touch, and as this week unfolds, you are going to want every update in real time because what looks like weakness can actually be preparation. What feels like suppression can be strategic delay, and what the crowd is calling a red flag may be the very signal institutions wait for before stepping in. So ask yourself this extreme question as we move forward. Is XRP actually in trouble? Or is this the exact stress test required before its role in the next financial system is fully revealed? Because once you see the setup, you cannot unsee it, and it changes everything. Now let's step into the data and authority layer where emotions die and power structures speak. Because when you strip away the tweets and the chart screenshots, the numbers and institutional behavior tell a very different story. And this is where things start to get uncomfortable for anyone betting against XRP. Because while price action looks heavy, on-chain metrics are quietly flashing accumulation signals that historically appear before explosive moves, not after collapses. And this is exactly where weak hands get shaken out while strong capital positions itself silently, because institutions do not buy green candles, they engineer red ones. And you need to understand that Ripple is not some isolated crypto company operating in a vacuum. It sits in rooms with the IMF, the BIS, central banks, and regulatory bodies that retail traders will never hear directly from. And when you hear the SEC dragging its feet, delaying clarity, extending uncertainty, you should be asking why the same SEC is simultaneously allowing tokenized assets, ETFs, and institutional crypto rails to accelerate behind the scenes, because that contradiction is not incompetence, it is choreography. And when names like BlackRock publicly talk about tokenization being the future of markets, when the IMF publishes papers on interoperable digital settlement systems, and when legacy banks quietly test liquidity corridors that mirror XRP's exact utility, you have to be intellectually dishonest to believe XRP has no seat at the table. And this is where authority matters, because Ripple executives are not arguing on Twitter, they are testifying, negotiating, and aligning with policymakers while retail is being psychologically worn down by short-term volatility. And if you look historically at assets that survive regulatory warfare, they do not explode during uncertainty. They compress, they frustrate, they bleed just enough to break conviction, and then they reprice violently when clarity hits. And that is why this week feels heavy, because pressure precedes permission, and permission precedes adoption, and adoption precedes price. So the real question is not why XRP feels weak, but why it is being forced to stay quiet while everything around it lines up perfectly for its original design. And that is not opinion, that is pattern recognition backed by authority and institutional behavior that retail rarely studies. This is where the catalyst narrative collides with the fear campaign, and you need to lock in mentally, because every tough week XRP has ever faced has been wrapped in the same recycled FUD playbook designed to exhaust holders right before momentum shifts. And right now that playbook is running at full speed. You hear whispers of regulatory risk, liquidity tightening, delayed adoption, insider selling, network stagnation, and you have to ask yourself why all of these narratives suddenly surge together, because organic fear does not synchronize like that. Manufactured fear does. And the catalyst everyone is missing is not a single headline, but a convergence. Because while retail is told nothing is happening, Ripple is expanding payment corridors, deepening relationships with banks in Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, and positioning XRP as a neutral bridge asset exactly when geopolitical fragmentation is forcing nations to rethink dollar dependence. And that is why the IMF conversation matters. That is why BIS experiments matter. That is why central bank language around interoperability matters, because XRP was literally designed for this moment, and the FUD defense is simple but brutal. Ask who benefits if XRP holders capitulate this week, because it is not retail, it is not long-term participants, it is entities that require liquidity, supply, and suppressed prices to accumulate without slippage. And every time XRP has been declared dead, irrelevant, or finished, it has gone on to survive while louder projects disappeared entirely. And that survival alone is a signal, because systems meant to be erased are not kept in regulatory limbo for years. They are shut down. And the fact that XRP remains operational, integrated, and legally contested rather than destroyed should trigger a WTF moment for anyone paying attention. Because this is not how worthless assets are treated. This is how strategically inconvenient assets are delayed until the broader system is ready to absorb them. Now we reach the point where the tough, weak narrative meets the brutal reality of price justification and the final warning. Because if you are looking at XRP charts and asking, why isn't it mooning yet? You are missing the institutional script entirely. And here is the kicker. Price is not a reflection of adoption, utility, or technological superiority in the short term. It is a function of control, supply management, and perception. And this week is a textbook example of that principle in action, because while retail panics, the big players, think BlackRock, Fidelity, JP Morgan, and select sovereign funds, are quietly positioning for the next legal clarity injection, and they are doing it in a way that ensures maximum pain for the weak hands, maximum accumulation for themselves, and a dramatic reprice for those who can survive the squeeze. And let me tell you this clearly, when Ripple announces further strategic corridors, compliance milestones, or partnership expansions, the reaction will not be measured. It will be explosive because the market has been artificially suppressed to build tension, and tension, respected holders, is what fuels violent upward repricing, not hype, not Twitter noise, not random FOMO. It is controlled systemic pressure. And that is why the warnings this week matter. Because if you sell in panic, you are selling exactly into the hands of entities that will exploit it for maximum leverage. And if you hold, you are positioned to ride what could be a systemic shock to the crypto status quo. Because XRP is not just a token, it is the bridge asset quietly embedded into the fabric of next-generation cross-border finance, the kind of utility that central banks, IMF strategists, and mega institutions cannot ignore. And the convergence of regulatory clarity, corridor expansion, and geopolitical pressure points to a reprice scenario that makes recent history look like a warm-up. And the final warning is this: do not be distracted by surface volatility, do not be swayed by fear engineered for your capitulation, and do not ignore the signals only visible to those willing to analyze institutional alignment rather than retail headlines, because if you survive this week with conviction, you will be positioned for a move that rewrites expectations, and if you do not, you will be left wondering why XRP. Here is the conclusion you need to engrave in your strategy and mindset, because this week is not just a test of patience, it is a test of awareness, insight, and conviction. And those who treat XRP like any other crypto are about to pay the price of ignorance. Because while mainstream media obsesses over minor dips, social sentiment, and speculative drama, the real narrative is quietly unfolding in boardrooms, central bank discussions, and settlement corridor rollouts. And this is exactly the kind of asymmetrical opportunity that separates serious investors from casual traders. And if you take one thing from this deep dive, let it be this: XRP is not reacting to the noise. It is being positioned for the moment when the global financial system can no longer ignore the efficiency, neutrality, and speed it provides, and the tough week. It is nothing but a precursor, a controlled friction engineered to weed out indecision and create the conditions for institutional precision strikes, and you now hold the knowledge that the masses lack. the map, while everyone else is wandering blindly in fear. And that knowledge is power, because when the moment arrives and XRP moves, it will not just be a price spike, it will be a systemic statement that echoes through markets, banks, and regulators alike. And if you are watching this, if you have held through noise before and are ready to do it again, you are in the small, elite group who will see this week for what it truly is, a setup for a move that could shock the crypto world and redefine how digital assets interact with traditional finance. So buckle in, stay informed, stay vigilant, and above all, respect the forces at play, because XRP is quietly scripting the next chapter while the world sleeps, and only those who understand the system will reap the rewards when the curtain rises.